TLDR is close at hand. DJ Jeff and Jonah chat of AI this and data that.
Oh, what a thoroughly scary intro. If you're listening to this in the distant future, you might be confused why that's there. So just for context, this podcast was released on Halloween, and Halloween will play a part in our main story. Okay, back to it. Welcome to Too Long Didn't Read, where we read every bit, footnote, not literally every bit, of AI news, research and discourse, so you don't have to. I'm Jonah, the digital content producer here at the Turing.
And I'm Smera. I'm a researcher on data justice and global ethical futures. And for those who have been around for long enough, DJ Jeff.
Yeah. It's been a jam-packed month, Smera, so let's have a look at a few headlines before we dive into our big stories.
Yeah, there's lots to speak about.
There is. So Nobel Prizes are raining down on AI game changers like rain. Geoffrey Hinton and John Hopfield won the Nobel Prize for Physics with their foundational work on artificial neural networks, and Demis Hassabis and John Jumper at Google DeepMind received the Nobel Prize for Chemistry for their work on the AlphaFold program, which we've mentioned in previous episodes.
In other news, Google has signed a world's first deal to buy nuclear energy for its data centers, with the hope of making AI greener.
And California Governor Gavin Newsom has killed a first-of-its-kind AI safety bill, which would have established liability for creators of AI models in the event they cause a catastrophe and the developer didn't take appropriate safety measures.
We could have dived deep on any one of those stories, Jonah. So what are we focusing on this month?
This month on TLDR, we will be exploring how AI is changing the way we die.
And we ask, what is the significance of quantum computing? But at the same time, we don't.
Oh, a quantum joke. Nice. And finally, we take a look at the AI tools that apply for jobs for you and discuss how you can pass the machine recruitment process. All over the globe, humanity honours and remembers the dead in a multitude of ways. Obon is celebrated in Japan, Buddhists and Taoists celebrate the Hungry Ghost Festival in China, Singapore and Taiwan. Dia de Muertos, or All Souls Day, famously goes large in Mexico. And of course, Halloween, which has its roots in Samhain, a Celtic festival celebrating the new year, which began on November 1st. It's clear that a connection with the dead is important, to remember legacy and pass down stories and family history, to grieve and say goodbye, to appreciate those still living and to thank the dead for what they made possible for us, to confront our own fears of the unknown and to appease our gods and ghosts and ask them not to punish or haunt us. But what does AI and data science mean to the dead and the one day dead?
John, I think we call them alive.
Right, yeah.
It is also worth mentioning here that death in the digital age is not a new thing. The end of sequestered death began at the advent of the internet. We've already seen how blogs, emails, social media profiles live on when someone dies. This is our digital legacy. We witnessed the subsequent complexities of privacy and data ownership. And I'm sure we're all aware how corporations might be capitalizing on all that data and potential earning opportunities. So add AI into the mix and you get a whole lot of new issues.
Yeah, like what?
Well, why don't we ask our very special guest?
Oh, good idea.
This month, we are joined by Dr. Jenny Kidd and Dr. Eva Nieto McAvoy. Jenny works in the School of Journalism, Media and Culture at Cardiff University, is a Turing Fellow, and her research focuses on the interdisciplinary fields of digital heritage and digital culture. Eva is a lecturer in digital media at King's College London. Her research explores theories and practices of new and interactive media in cultural and memory work at the intersection of knowledge, power, and technology.
Welcome, Jenny and Eva.
Thank you.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
Jenny, when I approached you about this podcast, you were at the Digital Death Conference, so I knew we needed to talk to you. But what is it about death that interests you? It's a bit morbid. Did you listen to too much My Chemical Romance growing up?
That's quite possibly the case. We are, for the most part, media and digital culture scholars, but ones who work with the past. So we're interested in questions about cultural heritage, about memory, and about archives. And we've done a lot of work, for example, with museums and thinking about how they use digital approaches, immersive media, social media, and all the rest of it. And of course, digital approaches open up new potentials for using data, increasingly now staggering amounts of digital data that belong to people who are now deceased. So as we're thinking about the past in our research, increasingly we find ourselves needing to talk about digital remains and about what is being done with or to those remains. And perhaps now, especially as we've been hearing in the context of AI and automation, where revival, reinvention and reworking become possibilities as well. And that's really where our research comes in and where our interest in digital death is situated, I would say.
Right.
So Eva, why do you think humans need to celebrate, remember, reanimate the dead or the past in general?
Well, you described it quite well in your introduction, Iona, when you were talking about the reasons why people might want to remember and connect with the dead. We're on a project called Synthetic Pasts right now, and we are investigating the close relationship between media technologies and representing the dead. And these are often called necro technologies. And these necro technologies are definitely far from new. So from the very beginning, they've taken many forms, from gravestones to funeral books, to death masks, memorial pages online, and now we have death bots, for instance. So technology in a way has always been intertwined with death. But for us, it's not just about the dead. It's also about, investigating this need that we have to create stories about ourselves and about our ancestry. Where do we come from? Who are we connected to? And ultimately, really, who are we?
I'm still hanging on death bots. I would love to know more about death bots because they sound terrifying.
Basically, what we're talking about with death bots and grief bots is conversational bots that are trained on data that you might input, into them. So you might decide to train one on the basis of somebody's social media data, a dead person maybe, so that you can then continue to interact with them over time. And in some instances, those can kind of, evolve or learn from you over time.
Okay, so that's the AI element. It's the generative AI. Okay. So who is reanimating or remediating these digital fragments and why, Jenny?
Okay, so I noted that in this latest project, we're looking at AI afterlives. And so in a general sense, we're thinking about how AI and automation are being used to animate or reanimate people from the past using their digital or digitized data. So what we're doing is we're looking at how people are doing this in 3 different kind of study sites or constituencies. So as we've been saying, one of the areas where we're looking at this, and it's super fascinating, as we've been noting, is in the context of personal archives and memories. Mm-hmm. So thinking about how people can, say, bring to life, quote unquote, their ancestors from images that they might have in their own personal archives using these bits of kit. So one of these bits of kit is called Deep Nostalgia. It comes from a genealogy company called MyHeritage. So using that bit of kit, what you can do is you can input a photo of a deceased ancestor. And what the system will do then is it will use a driver video to kind of power movement then in that image. So you would then see your ancestor smiling, blinking and moving their head. It's a really simple little bit of kit. And it really seemed to get a lot of traction when it was launched. This was something that we were interested in. And so I think now something like 100 million or so of these recreations have been made. So this was kind of a kind of big deal. So there's those kind of things. There are also systems that you can access online that will allow you to kind of manage your own life story and to record it and to leave that as a legacy that people can then interact with using kind of conversational AI. And there are also, as we've been saying, things like death bots and grief bots. So conversational bots then that are trained on data. It might be social media data, say, so that you can continue to interact with them, or at least that's kind of the conceit there. So there's all of that stuff that's going on in the context of personal archives and personal memory. And then we're also looking at what is happening in the context of museums and heritage sites and kind of collective memory there. So thinking about how they're using revival as some of these technologies as a way of engaging with visitors or users of their services. So that's our kind of second study site. And then the third is kind of in the context of the creative industries. So the kind of resurrection of stars on stage and on screen. So kind of tracing all the way back to the Tupac hologram, right through Audrey Hepburn, Robert Kardashian, Elise Regina, various different kinds of technologies, some AI, some not so much. which have been used to kind of reanimate or revive people for stage and screen. And I guess if you look across those different activities, you can begin to identify a range of different kind of ambitions that people have when they're doing this stuff. So that question of why are people doing this? They're wanting to educate people. They're using them for educational purposes. They're using them for entertainment purposes. They're using them to make money, of course, also as well. They're using them to commemorate and remember. But in most cases, I think a common kind of thread is an aim to kind of foster or maintain connections with people who have died or peoples from the past. And of course, that all raises lots of ethical questions, which we'll probably go on to say more about.
Wow. So I can picture times when I've seen AI or technology being used in a museum to bring stories from the past to life. I've certainly read about the creative industry and the celebs dealing with the AI knocking at the door. We've covered the writer strikes and the reanimation of John Lennon for the Beatles' last single. But of the three sort of study groups you mentioned, I'm least familiar with the personal. So going back to those death bots, what has been your personal experience from playing around with them?
So I was thinking about this from the kind of digital identity perspective. So if we understand now that the construction of identity is something that we do as a kind of hybrid project across different kind of spheres of our existence, including digital ones, we can see that it's actually quite a fragmented thing that we do. So I will present myself quite differently in my work emails than I will in my WhatsApps, even if those are going to the same people. And that's because, of course, the affordances of those formats and platforms, but also the kind of cultural and communicative norms that emerge in relation to them kind of, shape the way I am going to perform myself. So if I were to make a death bot from some of my digital remains, which kind of body of data I decide to use in order to create that kind of conversational avatar of me is going to impact quite profoundly then the way that avatar of me is going to communicate. And so I've been trying this out and seen as much. And one thing I've found is that, of course, when I'm using my WhatsApp data, I then become a kind of conversational bot who communicates in very short messages, emoji and exclamation marks. I don't always communicate like that, but I do tend to communicate like that in WhatsApp. And I think actually to try and sustain a kind of extended conversation with me over time on the basis of that kind of data would be quite limiting and probably quite exhausting. So that, instinctively in reflecting on that kind of notion of rigidity, I was thinking, well, of course, that's not a good thing. But I also wouldn't want my avatar to kind of evolve me into saying things that I would never say or that are incongruous with my worldview or my values, or to be, only and always the most kind of consumable or sellable version of myself. I think probably that wouldn't be very authentic. So I was kind of thinking that actually working with digital remains to create these kind of AI afterlives, if you're going to do that in a convincing way, that's quite a difficult balance to strike, actually. And this thing has to be kind of engaging enough. It has to be recognizable. It has to be consistent. It also has to be kind of human enough. So it has to be not too polished, not too sentimental, or why is it that we would seek out this thing, at all?
Yeah, Jenny, maybe we could actually just get into that and find out a bit more about what, these technologies mean and whether you've got any evidence of such technologies affecting the emotional connections we have to our ancestors.
Yeah, so in the study that we did of deep nostalgia, we wanted to look at the way that people were speaking about their feelings as they shared these animations, as they so often did in social media. We wanted to get a bit of a sense of what was going on there. So we looked at nearly 7,000 posts and tried to kind of get a snapshot of some of the discourses that were going on around those sharing patterns. And what we found was that they created actually quite a powerful emotional landscape when you looked across them, not for everybody, but for a majority of people in our sample. So I think it was something like 60% of people shared some kind of an emotional response to using these technologies. And in very large part, they were sharing very positive assessments of it. So they were feeling very positively in their emotional connection with these things. And what we found as we were looking at that in a bit more detail, what it was that it was often the movement in those images that was triggering those emotional resonances that kind of maximized the sense of immediacy there for people. And I guess that's kind of unsurprising, given that most of the animated images that were being used here featured deceased relatives, many of whom would not or couldn't have been captured through moving imagery in their lifetime. So actually seeing them move was quite a startling thing for people. And there was a really great example of this in our sample where one user reflected on this as being the first time they had ever seen their grandfather smile. And we found, and that they had found that very moving, seeing their grandfather smile for the first time. And we thought that was so interesting because this person now has a kind of new memory of this person smiling, who they never saw smile in their lifetime. And we might also say that it's not really his smile because it's the person in the driver's video's smile that is powering this movement. And so what kind of a connection is that then? What kind of an emotional resource does this thing become? And what kind of a memory then, is that this person has then of that? Is it a false memory? If it is, does it matter? If it matters, why does it matter? So for us, it raised all of, lots of questions. But I would say that we would never want to be dismissive of those kind of emotional aspects and how people reflect on their emotions in the orbit of these technologies. We talk regularly in the project about how we feel about them ourselves and about using them perhaps on our own archival materials. And we know that our own reticence about using them actually has strong kind of emotional dimensions. What if we were to use these tools and it were to alter or distort in some way how we then feel about the person in the images or in the footage? And can that then be kind of undone, unseen, unfelt and forgotten? And of course, we don't know what the answers to those questions are, but we're hoping in the project in the coming months to explore that in a bit more detail and hopefully, with any luck, get some answers.
Yeah. So is there a difference between contemporary people's digital remains and historical people's digital remains? Is there a sort of digital remains versus digital fossils?
Yeah, so I really like this question. I find this idea of the fossil quite a useful kind of idea to think with about some of these issues. So I guess what we're talking about there is our data and our information remains more generally, perhaps. And clearly, as we've been saying, we always had those, our stories, our papers and records, perhaps our portraiture. And these are often now digitized posthumously, so after we die. Perhaps they're more likely to be digitized, of course, if we're somebody of note. But we can call those a person from the past's digital remains now then, I suppose. But now, of course, we also can talk about all of our kind of born digital remains. So those are remains that are born of the digital environment in pretty much every moment of our existence in societies like ours here in the UK. And we've been talking about these, our social media posts, emails, voice notes, Fitbit data, playlists, all the rest of it. And of course, then the scale of all of that is, what is kind of unprecedented. And all of that stuff, as we've been saying, is kind of scattered through different platforms and services and servers, connected in ways that we might not have anticipated or might not yet be able to anticipate. And we're interested then in all of that and what it means for memory and where it's situated. And then that notion of the fossil becomes really interesting because it kind of suggests questions about what gets preserved, what gets sedimented, what gets forgotten. And I think also that kind of idea of the fossil and the kind of distinction between fossils and remains also suggests maybe that we feel differently about our uses of data as time passes. And I think that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think we should sort of feel differently in a way. If I was using a death bot, for example, to grieve someone, I would want that bot to sort of evolve. I guess I'd want it to fade, to sort of fossilise the memory in a way. So it reflects how we grieve, i.e. sort of we remember our loved ones, but we move on. I can't imagine anything worse than getting bored of a reanimated loved one. I'd feel so guilty for not checking in on the death bot. Do you think there's a way death bots could be developed to sort of parallel the real grief process, not remain rigid, but to sort of help us move on?
Yeah, there has been some suggestion in some of the literature around death bots and grief bots in particular, that these kinds of things should maybe only be used in certain kinds of conditions, so therapeutic conditions, and they should only be used for certain amounts of time. So there would be kind of built into the regulation around those things, particular kinds of uses, that would, as you say, kind of, naturally change over time.
And they might do anyway. I mean, we have this idea that if we put it online, it will be forever, but I quite doubt that. Servers crash, data is lost.
Yeah.
Links to rigidity and whether over time, say, a death bot or a grief bot could kind of, evolve, so it could learn about you and it could learn about the world and it could change over time, or maybe become, so far away from the original person that you would cease to be interested in it, and, you would kind of naturally move on.
Yeah, that's interesting.
That idea that they evolve is really interesting.
Yeah.
Coming down to, I'd say the more the banal lives that we as individuals live, and not the great people of history. What happens if me, a celebrity in my own right, what happens to my digital remains if I were to, say, die mid-podcast? Do I have a say in who owns it? Is there a 70-year-old hold on it, like copyrights? Do I have to write it into my will, or will my family decide? I feel like one of my exes has control over my Facebook, but that's as much as I've given out till now.
You might want to get that control back. Who knows? I mean, yeah, this is a very complex question with a lot of practical and legal dimensions. So first we need to think, as you just mentioned, Facebook, but we need to think of what we mean by digital remains. So are we talking about a medical data? Are we talking about tweets? This podcast or photographs that you upload to the cloud. So all of these records will be owned by different people, sort of public records, and the boundaries are increasingly blurred, of commercial enterprises as well. And some of them are not very obvious or desirable custodians of our personal data in life or in death. And as you mentioned, it's going to depend on who you are, your status, where you are, so the regulatory context, and how prepared you are. So have you expressed your intentions, which you can in your will, and who has access to those remains, as you just said? Is it your ex-boyfriend on Facebook? Or, so careful with your passwords and who you give those to. So very often, in the absence of clear enough guidelines, the ethical decisions are left to commercial media and tech companies like social platforms. So the responsibility we found in our study is often passed to the user. For instance, you have to sign crazy terms and conditions that no one ever reads. And, hidden within those are very frequently kind of issues relating with what's going to happen with your data. And this is when you're alive, not even when you're dead. So we will be required to think more about our data as we plan for our own deaths. For example, in wills, digital assets planning and digital legacy safeguarding will no doubt become big business. And there is already a whole industry emerging around these challenges. And this begins to suggest a lot of ethical and practical questions.
I have a side interjection. Does giving up one's digital health data count as a form of organ donation?
That is a great question. I do not know, but definitely in the way in which we're, kind of biomediated and, kind of our digital selves and digital bodies. So what are the limits? And are we just datafied bodies? And
Say when digital twins we have a digital twin of all of our organs and whatnot, that data will be vital beyond our death, won't it?
Yeah, it kind of hammers home for me the kind of granularity with which we might want to approach this also, because I might be quite happy to have my health data, shared and contribute to some idea of a, common good that might emerge from the sharing of that data. But that doesn't mean that I want all of my data to be shared. And so I really need to sit down and think in quite a granular way about all of that. But who's going to do that?
Also, it depends on how it's being shared, because it could be aggregated data, and you might not be identifiable through that data, which is kind of the idea that we all hold on to when we give our data for kind of the larger good. And if at some point you become identifiable, is the fact that your kid has a high percentage of likelihood to inherit a genetic disease. Say, for instance, this is kind of information that could come from your medical data, something that, you want out there, you want insurance companies to know. So in a way, there's this balance between open data and the uses that, different stakeholders are going to make of it, and whether you are identifiable within that data or not.
Yeah.
This has all been so interesting, but at the same time, it feels like dying seems as exhausting as living with the amount of admin you have to face.
That's so well observed.
But thank you both so much for joining us today. And I don't know about you, but I intend to live forever or die trying.
Well, thanks so much, Jenny and Ava. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you.
Yeah, that was great. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
We're almost at the end of October, which is basically November, which might as well be December, and then boom, 2025 and the relentless advancement of the sands of time.
I do love a bit of existential dread in our podcast, but I was hoping we reserve it for the story segment, not for me to start worrying if I made good use of this year.
Well, our next story isn't aimed at being existential, although there are links to uncertainty, specifically the uncertainty principle in quantum mechanics. UNESCO has proclaimed 2025 to be the International Year of Quantum Science and Technology. While reading up on this, I also came across articles mentioning the rapid advancements in quantum computing. For instance, one article from this month mentions how quantum computing will have a ChatGPT moment in the coming months.
Not sure if ChatGPT moment is meant to spell doom, but the article mentions Oxford Ionics' development of a microchip which can be mass-produced soon with the potential to create the world's first viable quantum computer.
Okay, before you get into the joys of microchips, could you tell us a bit more about quantum computing? I know there's something about a cat.
I mean, what would we be as a race if we didn't have cats at the center of the story? So quantum mechanics is a rather complex field, and I'm not going to do justice in how I explain it in this podcast. So I will encourage our listeners to go and explore it on their own. But from what I can understand, it operates on a fundamentally small level, so small that it causes many of those very fundamental theories in physics to fall apart. So what it means in computing is So in regular computers, we use bits, which are binary. We have ones and zeros. At the quantum level, qubits, which is where we store the information, stores this in a similar way to bits, but they behave very differently due to their quantum properties. Okay. We have something called superposition, where these qubits exist in multiple stages at once. So just imagine we go back to that cat experiment that everyone talks about. The cat is both dead and alive until we figure out what it is. Then we have entanglement, where we can infer properties of the qubits based on the qualities of other qubits. And what this means for quantum computing is that a qubit can hold a lot of different information at the same time. And at the moment that we observe it, those many possibilities of its superposition collapses into whatever we observe at the time that we observe it. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, sure.
Because there's some more. Because when an entangled qubit is in a state of superposition, each of its entangled connections is also in a state of superposition. So an entangled qubit, which means a qubit that if there are two of them and I'm observing one and this qubit says up, then the other qubit I will presume to be down, because that's how entanglement works at a very, very, very basic level. And these are in a state of superposition, which means they exist in multiple different stages. Instead of the binary 1 and 0, they can be 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 0, so on and so forth. Right. Now, because they're both entangled and in a state of superposition, each of those connections that it has is also in a state of superposition. So think about it like there are these different gaps where information can be stored, as opposed to just the binary 1 and 0 storage of information, which increases the potential power for quantum computers.
Okay. So let me get this right. Quantum computing is working at the atomic level. And this is where our understanding of physics gets a little funky, because at an atomic level, nature doesn't adhere to our binary physics rules. And that's why things can be on and off at the same time, right? That's why the cat is both dead and alive. In typical human fashion, we are exploiting this superposition, as it's called, and other quantum properties like entanglement to make mega speedy processing. So a problem that might take a normal computer years to solve, a quantum computer could solve instantaneously.
It's not a bad summary, although I will flag that quantum computers regularly get things wrong, and they just do it on a much larger scale.
Right, okay.
But it's not that they are inherently right, and it's really interesting when you see the videos that show what these quantum computers look like. And as someone described it, it's a refrigerator inside a refrigerator inside a refrigerator that holds a super, super extremely cold microchip.
Yeah, one of the coldest things in the universe, right? Okay, so what kind of calculations are we so impatient to get the answer for?
So there are a lot of different possibilities for quantum computing to, I won't say revolutionize, but really advance human knowledge. And instead of just giving the research that I've done, I actually reached out to a friend of mine, Dr. Fergus Hayes, who was at the University of Glasgow, who gave me a couple of points that he thinks all our listeners should know when it comes to quantum computing and quantum machine learning. So quantum computing applications are very specific, so it will not have a blanket change to all industries the same way that machine learning has in the past 10 years. So not really ChatGPT in that sense. So it's important to know that quantum computing applications are very specific, and it will not have a blanket change to all industries in the same way that machine learning has in, say, the past 10 years. One possible route is drug discovery, where quantum computers could allow us to simulate chemical systems in new ways. There's an understanding that the ways in which these diseases behave is very similar to the quantum states in which, quantum computing behaves. So just use that state of existence to simulate the drug discovery, which is really cool. And I'm assuming combined with what AlphaFold is up to, this could actually mean a very, very bright future for us. But this technology is still in very, very early stages. And according to Fergus, it might be 10 to 20 years before many of these really powerful use cases can actually be realized.
Okay, so one thing I keep reading about when I was researching this was how our digital security is going to be immediately exposed when the quantum computer lands. They call it Q-Day, right? So cryptography as we know it could be rendered useless, right? A quantum computer could basically decrypt anything set up in the conventional way. That's a bit worrying, isn't it?
Yeah, that's also an example that Fergus gives, where our modern method of encrypting messages, so that's banking transactions and so forth, would no longer be secure because they could be decrypted by a quantum computer. And that would not only wreak financial devastation, but personally, that means all your information might be out there. Yeah. And some people don't even think it's going to be a brute force attack where it's going to happen all on one day, but it might be a process of them slowly accruing all of this information before they finally decide to do something with it. But I like to think in line with, how cybersecurity was dealt with, that people will work on solutions for it. And sometimes when you break a code, you also make a code and find a way to defend against it using the same technology. I came across this article that said Apple is already looking into using quantum encryption methods for their iMessage application.
Okay, so we're working on creating a machine that will create problems, but don't worry, we're also working on the solutions for the problem the machine we are working on will create. Humans just can't help themselves, can they?
Yeah, there are risks in general, as we often list out on this podcast, but it is believed that quantum computers will help immensely in a lot of areas. As I mentioned, health, communications, it might help financial trading and even defense. But the biggest advantage is that a new technology brings might not have even been comprehended yet.
Oh, nice. Okay, so we're yet to see if 2025 will indeed be the year of quantum, but maybe some of the articles I read this month are hyping up an imminent Q-Day a little prematurely, at least for us on the outside of niche drug discovery and cybersecurity. But we will keep our eyes on the horizon for any big updates to come, and hopefully, like me, you now have a better, if not still kind of mind-bendy, understanding of what a quantum computer is and why it will certainly matter in the future.
So now on to the hot and scintillating topic of jobs and AI. I know this is a big concern for many of my friends, and increasingly I find myself concerned by this as well. What is our future in a time where major companies are announcing mass layoffs and turning more and more to AI models to do tasks that humans previously did?
So we have covered the future of jobs in a previous episode that we'll link in the show notes, where we looked into universal basic income and the potential free time for humans to do human things like, I don't know, carving wooden spoons, turning bowls, walking amongst the trees, instead of like scheduled meetings.
Yes, but this story is more about how AI is currently influencing the job search and the job application process. I have recently been on the lookout for new jobs, and I can imagine scores of those who have recently been laid off by some of the biggest tech firms, from Microsoft to TikTok, as well as those who may have even recently graduated with great hopes of their future in the world. might be keen to hear the role of technology in recruitment.
And I came across this investigative report from 404 Media, where a journalist, Jason Kobler, used a job application bot called Auto Jobs Applier AI Hawk to apply for 2,843 roles in 3 months. Kobler has already had 4 interviews and even received an offer on a senior role. And he's, done nothing. This is bonkers.
As someone who's facing the arduous task of rewriting cover letters and, CVs and resumes to match different roles, I cannot deny this sounds really appealing.
Yeah, and in the article, there's a video of the journalist in a cafe, and he sort of presses go, and then he goes and gets a coffee, sits back, drink, and it's just, you see the screen just goes, it's sort of LinkedIn jobs.
Yeah.
Just apply, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, there's got to be a catch though, right?
I mean, would I be DJ Jeff if I didn't point out the ethical debates?
Yes, go DJ Jeff.
At a broad level, we are seeing the increasing use of LLMs in job applications, as the report has pointed out. And these job applications are being reviewed by different AI tools. Some will even be interviewed by AI avatars. This isn't only an issue for human recruiters who might be at risk of losing their jobs, but it points to this very murky online ecosystem where everything seems machine generated or to some extent influenced.
So we're going to end up in this crazy position where you apply for a job using AI, the job uses AI to select you, then you're interviewed by an AI, but you could just use an AI to attend the interview. I feel like if the employer and the employee have equal access to AI, then it sort of balances out, and then the right people would still be selected to go forward to the job. If everyone's got the same tools, then the battlefield is sort of level.
Which is actually what was the motivation behind the job application bot AI Hawk.
Okay.
One of the co-founders mentioned that this is a way to balance the use of AI in the recruitment process.
So I suppose this goes back to the conversation Jesse and you had with Chris Thomas on a previous episode about whether the internet is dead and everything is generated garbage. now also there's more internet death leaking out into the job market.
Since we already covered that in a previous episode, I'm not even going to touch that can of worms right now. But in terms of what an individual applying in this market would have to face, let's take a hypothetical case, right? Let's have this individual, Jen.
Hillary. Hillary.
Why Hillary?
It's my mum's name.
Oh, cute. Okay. Okay, so we have hypothetical Hillary. Now, Hillary has been told that she will be laid off. She spends her whole weekend working on a cover letter and a resume, which fits a few roles that she has found on LinkedIn. Hillary's applications may then be fed into an application tracking system, or ATS. This tool automatically scans the CVs and sends rejections to those who do not pass the checks that this ATS system is trained for.
Right, okay. So I assume that this is great for recruiters who don't have time to review hundreds of applications, but I also assume it's not great for our friend Hillary.
I mean, from what I found out, nearly 80% of Fortune 500 companies are using ATS. So poor Hillary might be rejected because her application, for instance, may not have contained keywords or may not have been in a format that was machine readable. According to one article, a recruiter will sift through hundreds of these applications that have been fed into a system and search for keywords like strategy or their educational past, say, a master's or a PhD. If Hillary, despite having, say, 10 years of prolific experience in a field of research, did not use this specific industry term or specific term in that job description, she may not be ranked very high.
Yeah, and I read that sort of bad font choice and stuff like that could make or break it too. So, Hillary, no Comic Sans. I know how you love Comic Sans.
I mean, yeah, that's also an important point. I, for one, absolutely hate Arial, and I prefer the more pretentious Garamond.
Oh.
But if I did use it, and I had used it in the past, that would be an automatic rejection for me.
Wow.
So, personal touch, forget about it.
Blimey. But it does seem to make the job easier for recruiters and possibly standardizes the process. So once you learn the tips and tricks, you can circumvent the system, right?
I would like to hope so, but while researching this, I recall the case of E-Verify, which is an online database that's run by the US Department of Homeland Security, which essentially tries to see an employee's eligibility to work in the US. So it is well-intentioned, one could say, but it disproportionately has impacted minority groups. For instance, the American Civil Liberties Union noted that non-US English names and spellings are 20 times more likely to be flagged by the system. Blimey. And so you can imagine even individuals with authorized permanent residency and immigrants would constantly be flagged by the system. And this is not entirely the case with the application tracking system, but do you see how, using these forms of technology could end up creating a lot of these problems or impacting certain communities?
Yeah, that is nuts. So what can our listeners who are potentially applying for new jobs do to ensure they've got a fighting chance against the machines?
I honestly wish I knew this before I sent out random applications using my Garamond font. But as mentioned earlier, recruiters suggest using keywords from the job descriptions in their CVs and cover letters. Now, this does not mean you because I've seen a lot of TikTok folks saying you should take the job description and put it in white text somewhere in the background of your thing. No, that would be an immediate rejection and you shouldn't mess around with that. But more of, if anything within your work experience is related to that job description element, try to use that term in your CV whilst describing what you've done to get the results that you have. And now, for those who prefer pizzazz of the fun fonts, it is recommended to get in line and pick from the very appealing list of Times New Roman, Cambria, Arial, Calibri, and Helvetica.
I like Calibri.
Ew. Also, don't use graphics because many of these machines cannot read graphics. So if you put images of certificates and certifications that you've received, because it breaks up the monotony of your black and white screen. Like I said, personality not necessary. Section headers are also important because information that's organized chronologically with the month-year format is machine readable and is what they prefer. We'll link some of these resources for listeners to find out more on the specifics of what they can do to optimize their applications for the ATS.
And you didn't mention running job application bots like AI Hawk. Should listeners stay away from it?
I mean, technically, platforms like LinkedIn do not permit the use of third-party software and bots. So they try to limit unauthorized activity so that applicants are human. But at the same time, LinkedIn also uses chatbots to help premium subscribers assess their qualifications and suggest changes to make the candidate stand out. So the extent to which you can use AI in this field varies based on which side you're looking at it from.
So recently I had to go through a lot of CVs for a role that became vacant in my team, the marketing team here at the Turing. And my line manager and I went through every cover letter and CV and scored them on our predetermined requirements based on the job description, giving everyone equal and fair attention, no matter the font. And one thing I really wanted to see was personality. To be a content maker in the science world, you need to have a passion for science communication, not just for making videos and podcasts. So I guess my question is, if I were applying for a job, I would want to know if I'm writing a CV or cover letter to an AI or to a human, because it would definitely affect how I write it. Maybe it shouldn't, but it would. Is that information that recruiters sort of make visible? Is that best practice to do?
I'm not entirely sure on that, but as you recall, I mentioned that nearly 98% of these Fortune 500 companies use these kind of recruitment procedures, right? So any large enough firm is more likely, I would say, to use such a tool as opposed to, maybe charities like ours where we value that form of personality. Because honestly, if the Turing used an ATS on my application, I would have been rejected because I use Garamond, as I mentioned before.
Well, and also in these CVs that I've just been through, it's very clear who is using AI, like ChatGPT, to create their CV. And although it gets all those keywords in brilliantly from the job description, when you're looking at them with human eyes, it's like, oh, I've seen this before in the last 4 CVs. So I think that would be really useful for people to know. Obviously,
It is interesting because I came across this site called JobScan, and I will flag that I did not read that data policy, so I'm not suggesting everyone run to this website right now because I've not verified it.
Right.
But I did want to see whether my CV is fitting a certain job, right? And it was good at pointing out where all there were issues. For instance, it pointed out that I wasn't using as many of those industry terms and the job description elements. It also suggested I be more succinct in the kind of experience that I'm doing, give an overview of what my experience in the past has been, and so forth. So I guess for those who are who are desperate to search for jobs, maybe it's worth considering some of the feedback that's coming out of these models, because it might be useful, especially if you're applying to big tech firms and these larger corporations.
Very interesting. So it's kind of, I suppose it also means we should encourage tech firms to think about a sentence we use often in this podcast: nothing about us without us.
100%. That's the dream.
There we go, another TLDR in the bag. Give us a follow and or like. Find us on YouTube with the handle The Alan Turing Institute UK, and Instagram with @TuringInst. Heck, write us a glowing review if you fancy. Email us some thought-provoking questions to podcast@turing.ac.uk. Basically, validate us, yeah. Big many thanks to Jenny and Ava for taking us into the digital afterlife. Thanks to Jessie for braving my voice throughout the edit process. And thanks, Smera. Always a pleasure. Toodaloo.
Toodles, Jonah. Good luck with whatever spoon you will be carving sometime soon.
I've got some nice silver birch lined up, although it's
beginning
to
of course
spalt.